She didn't plan to say it at a gala surrounded by 500 of Seoul's most powerful people. She didn't plan to say it at all. But when the doctor's words had been sitting inside her chest like a burning coal for 72 hours, when she had cried alone in the bathroom of a 5-star hotel, staring at 4 different pregnancy tests lined up on the marble counter like a jury, when she had rehearsed 100 ways to keep it silent and found that silence was no longer something her body could hold, she said it anyway. "I'm 60 years old, Min-ho." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but in that ballroom, it carried like a thunderclap. "I thought my season for miracles had passed decades ago. But I'm pregnant." The crystal champagne flute in his hand shattered. Not because he dropped it, because his grip tightened so suddenly, so completely, that the glass had no choice but to surrender. Blood traced a slow line down his palm. He didn't feel it. The room went deathly still. 500 people. Senators, CEOs, socialites, heirs to old Korean fortunes, every single one of them stopped breathing, stopped talking, stopped pretending they hadn't been listening. For 20 years they had mocked her. Adaeze Okonkwo, the Nigerian woman who seduced Korea's most feared billionaire. Too old, too foreign, too common for his world, undeserving of his name, his empire, his love. But right now, as Kang Min-ho turned to look at her, really look at her, tears forming in eyes that the business world swore had never once softened, he didn't see a woman past her season. He saw the mother of his heir. He saw the miracle that would change the Korean underworld forever. And for the first time in 20 years, he didn't care who was watching. Her name was Adaeze Okonkwo, and she had never been the kind of woman who asked for a soft landing. She was born in Enugu, Nigeria, the 4th daughter of a schoolteacher and a seamstress who believed that a woman's dignity was the only inheritance that couldn't be taken from her. She grew up watching her mother press other people's fabric with tired hands, and she swore, quietly, privately, the way only daughters of seamstresses learn to swear things, that she would one day own the table where decisions were made, not just serve at it. By 30, she had built a textile import company that supplied luxury fabric to boutiques across West Africa. By 40, she had expanded into South Korea, walking into boardrooms where men twice her size tried to dismiss her with their eyes before she had even opened her mouth. She always let them. And then she spoke. That was how she had met Kang Min-ho the first time, across a boardroom table in Seoul, 22 years ago. He had been 38, already a ghost story the Korean business world told its children, the heir to the Kang dynasty, the man who had buried his father's debt and turned it into a global empire through methods that made even the government nervous to investigate. She had been 38 too, freshly divorced, with a 12-year-old daughter named Chisum and a suitcase full of fabric samples. He had looked at her the way no man in that room had, not with dismissal, not with hunger, but with something rarer, recognition. Like he had been waiting for something his whole life and hadn't known what it looked like until she walked in. Their business relationship lasted 6 months. Their love affair began on a rainy evening in Incheon when his car broke down outside her hotel, and she found him standing in the downpour, jacket ruined, looking, for the first time since she'd known him, completely human. She had laughed. He had looked at her like she had just done something dangerous, and then slowly he had laughed too. That laugh had cost them both 20 years of their lives, because loving Kang Min-ho was not a simple thing. He came with a world, a terrifying, glittering, blood-soaked world of family politics, corporate warfare, and a Korean socialite network that had already decided, long before Adaeze arrived, what kind of woman deserved to stand beside him. And she was not that woman. His mother, the formidable Madame Yoon Soo-jin, had made that clear from the first day she laid eyes on Adaeze. "You are a beautiful woman," she had said, in the kind of tone that made beautiful sound like a diagnosis. But beauty fades, and foreign beauty fades fastest of all in Korean society. My son has obligations to his name, to his bloodline, to his legacy. You would do well to understand this before you let yourself fall too deeply. Adaeze had smiled, the kind of smile that her mother taught her, the one that never showed the wound. "Thank you for your concern, Madam Yoon," she had said. "I'll keep it in mind." She had not kept it in mind. She had fallen so completely, so catastrophically in love with Minho that she forgot every warning she had ever given herself. She had moved to Seoul. She had learned Korean, fluently, perfectly, in a way that shocked even his business partners. She had raised her daughter Chisum in a city that never fully accepted them, navigating school systems and social circles where she and her child were always the most foreign thing in the room. She had done all of this without complaint, and in return, Minho had loved her in the way that powerful men love, intensely, protectively, privately, and never once gave her the one thing she had spent 2 decades quietly waiting for: his name, not as a wife, not legally, not publicly. He had kept her in a beautiful apartment 3 blocks from his penthouse. He had given her access to his accounts, his world, his body, his secrets. He had looked at her with eyes that told her she was the center of his universe. But he had never called her his wife in front of the people who mattered. His mother had seen to that. And for 20 years, the socialites of Seoul had watched Adaeze Okonkwo, elegant, accomplished, endlessly dignified, and called her what they would never have dared call her to her face: his mistress. The gala was the Kang Foundation's annual charity event, a night of obscene wealth dressed up in the language of generosity. Adaeze had attended every year for 2 decades. She always arrived on Minho's arm. She always wore something that made the room turn. She always smiled through the whispers and the pointed glances, and the way certain women made sure to greet Minho warmly and look through her as if she were made of glass. This year, she had almost not come. 3 days earlier, she had been in the bathroom of their private villa in Jeju Island, throwing up for the 4th morning in a row, telling herself it was stress, travel fatigue, the beginning of some viral illness that would pass by the weekend. She was 60 years old. She was not pregnant, except she was. 4 tests. A blood test taken at a private clinic where she had given a false name and worn sunglasses indoors like a woman in a spy film. Dr. Park's careful, stunned voice on the phone saying, Ms. Okonkwo, I want to be very clear with you. You are approximately 8 weeks pregnant. This is highly uncommon at your age, but it is not unheard of. Given your medical history and the fertility preservation procedure you underwent years ago, the pregnancy is medically possible, though still extremely rare. You are in excellent health. I would strongly recommend... She had stopped listening after pregnant. She had sat on the edge of the clinic bed for 40 minutes staring at the wall. She was 60. Chisholm was 32 now, a successful architect in Lagos with her own life, her own story. Adaeze had made peace, or what she told herself was peace, with the fact that her body's season for this kind of miracle had passed. And now this. She had not told Minho. She had come to the gala planning to smile through the evening, get through the night, and then sit him down tomorrow in the quiet of their villa and find a way to say words that she still hadn't fully organized in her own mind. But fate, it turned out, had its own timeline. It was Madam Yoon Soo-jin who started it. The old woman, 78 years old, still sharp as a blade, moving through the gala on the arm of Minho's younger brother, Jaywan, had cornered Adaeze near the champagne table. "You look tired," she said without preamble. "Older. The years are catching up with you." Adaeze took a sip of her sparkling water. She hadn't touched alcohol in 3 days, and smiled. "I feel wonderful, actually. Thank you." Minho has been patient. The old woman lowered her voice, but her eyes stayed cold and loud. 20 years is long enough for any man to carry a burden out of sentiment. He has responsibilities now. His younger brother, Jaywan, is engaged to the Shin family's daughter. There will be a grandchild from that line before the year is out. Minho needs to formalize something appropriate, before he is completely overshadowed by his younger brother's legacy. Adaeze set her glass down very slowly. "Are you asking him to marry someone else?" she said quietly. "I am informing you," Madame Yoon said, "that arrangements are already in progress. A match has been proposed. The woman is 41, Korean, from a respected family. Minho has agreed to meet with her. The formal announcement will be made next month." She tilted her head. "I wanted to extend you the courtesy of knowing before the rest of Seoul does." The ballroom kept spinning around them. Laughter, music, crystal glasses catching light. Adaeze felt the floor shift beneath her feet. "He agreed?" The words came out before she could arrange her face around them. "He agreed to this?" "He is the head of the Kang dynasty," Madame Yoon said simply. "He has always known what his responsibilities required. You have been an indulgence, a long one, but indulgences end." She smiled, and it was the smile of a woman who had been waiting 20 years to deliver this particular sentence. "Enjoy the rest of the evening." She walked away, and Adaeze stood there, alone in the middle of 500 people, with a secret burning inside her body, and the sudden complete understanding that silence was not going to protect her anymore. She found Minho on the far side of the ballroom, deep in conversation with a group of politicians. He saw her face from 20 feet away and knew immediately. He always knew, with her. It was one of the things she had never been able to decide if she loved or resented about him. He excused himself and crossed the room to her. "Ada." His voice was low, private, meant only for her. "What happened?" She looked at him, really looked at him, the way she had been trying not to look all evening, because looking at him with this secret inside her felt too enormous, too dangerous, like holding a lit match near fabric. "Your mother told me," she said quietly, "about the match, about the arrangement." Something moved through his eyes, something she didn't have the vocabulary for. "Ada, were you going to tell me?" "Ada, Minho." Her voice dropped to a whisper, but it steadied itself, hardened, became, without her fully intending it, something unbreakable. "I need you to hear something, and I need you to hear it right now, tonight, in this room, because I cannot—" her voice fractured for just a moment. "I cannot carry this alone for one more hour." He stepped closer. The room noise fell away. The whole world narrowed to the 2 feet of air between them. She looked up at him, this man she had loved across 2 decades, 2 continents, 2 languages, and more pain than she had ever let anyone see. And she said it. "I'm 60 years old, Minho. I thought my season for miracles had passed decades ago." She breathed. "But I'm pregnant." The glass shattered. The room turned, and nothing would ever be the same again. For exactly 4 seconds, Kang Min-ho did not move. He stood in the center of the most powerful room in Seoul, blood sliding down his palm from the broken crystal, champagne soaking his cuff, and he didn't blink, didn't breathe, didn't make a sound. The 4 seconds lasted a century, and then something happened to his face that the people in that room would talk about for the rest of their lives. Kang Min-ho, the man who had closed billion-dollar deals without raising his heart rate, the man who had buried enemies without changing his expression, the man whom even his own board members feared to look at directly, broke open. Not loudly, not dramatically, not the way it happens in movies with heaving sobs and raised voices, quietly, devastatingly, like a building whose foundation finally admits it has been cracked for years. His eyes filled, and in 20 years, Adaeze had never once seen him cry. "Ada," His voice, that controlled, authoritative voice that moved markets and ended careers, came out rough and cracked and completely human. "Ada, are you—" The doctor confirmed it. 3 days ago. She held herself very still, watching him. "I didn't know how to tell you." He reached for her. His bleeding hand cupped her face with a gentleness that was almost violent in its contrast to everything she had just been told by his mother. "Why didn't you tell me immediately?" he whispered. "Why did you carry this alone?" "Because your mother just told me you're being set up to marry someone else." Her voice was composed, just barely, and I needed to know which version of tonight I was walking into. The silence between them was electric. Behind them, all around them, 500 people held their breath. Madame Yoon Soo-jin stood 15 feet away, her champagne frozen halfway to her lips, her face a mask of controlled shock that was slowly, visibly cracking at the edges. Jaywan, Minho's younger brother, had gone completely still. Beside him, his fiancée gripped his arm with white knuckles. Minho did not look at any of them. He looked only at Adaeze. "There is no arrangement," my mother proposed the meeting. "I never agreed to a marriage," he said. His voice was soft but final, the kind of voice that ends things. There was never going to be one. My mother made a move she was not authorized to make. "Minho!" Madame Yoon's voice cut through the silence from across the room. He turned, and the look he gave his mother, the people who witnessed it would later describe it as the moment they understood for the first time that Minho had not built his empire in spite of his capacity for coldness. He had built it because of it. "Not tonight," he said. Just those 2 words, quiet as a door closing forever. Madame Yoon Soo-jin's mouth closed. He turned back to Adaeze. "I need you to come with me," he said. "Where?" He looked at her with those tear-damp eyes, and then he did something that no one, not his board, not his lawyers, not his family, not a single person in that glittering room, had ever seen Kang Min-ho do. He lowered himself to one knee, on the ballroom floor of his own foundation's gala, in front of 500 witnesses, with blood still on his hand and glass still at his feet. The entire room inhaled. "I have been a coward," he said. His voice was steady now, the way things are steady after the worst has already been said and survived. "For 20 years, I let the world treat you as something less than what you are to me. I told myself I was protecting you, protecting us, protecting the business. I told myself everything except the truth, which is that I was afraid of my mother, afraid of what this world would do to us if I forced it to accept what I already knew." Adaeze could not breathe. "You are the love of my life, Adaeze Okonkwo. You have been the love of my life since a rainy night in Incheon 22 years ago, and I have been an idiot of spectacular proportions for every year I spent not saying it loud enough." His jaw tightened. "I am 60 years old. You are 60 years old, and apparently—" His voice broke slightly, recovered. "We are going to have a child." Someone in the room made a sound. Several someones. "Marry me," he said. "Not because of the baby, not because of my mother's games, not because of this room or these people or what it looks like. Marry me because I am asking you, openly, publicly, without conditions, to be the woman this world finally recognizes as mine." The silence stretched. Adaeze looked down at him, this powerful, complicated, deeply imperfect man who had loved her in ways both magnificent and insufficient, who had given her everything except the courage she had always needed him to have. And she said nothing for a very long moment, long enough to make the room nervous, long enough to make him nervous. And then, "Get up, Minho." He rose. She reached up and held his face in both her hands, his blood on her fingers now, both of them marked by the same wound. "I don't want to marry you because you are afraid," she said quietly, "and I don't want to marry you because of a baby or a room full of people or your mother's cruelty. I want to marry you because you mean it. Do you mean it? Ada, do you mean it?" His eyes held hers. "With everything I have," he said. "With everything I am." She studied him for one more heartbeat, and then she kissed him. In the middle of that ballroom, with 500 people watching, the Nigerian seamstress's daughter, who had spent 20 years being called a mistress, kissed the Korean billionaire who had spent 20 years being too afraid to call her his equal. And the room erupted, not all of it in celebration. The next 72 hours were not the fairy tale the room had imagined. They never were, in real life. Madame Yoon Soo-jin did not go quietly into the night. She went into battle. The morning after the gala, Min-ho's phone lit up with calls from every corner of the Kang business empire. Board members, family lawyers, the PR team, the family council that hadn't convened in 11 years. She orchestrated this, the old woman told Jaywan over breakfast at the family compound, her voice stripped of all warmth. This announcement, this pregnancy, this whole scene, she's been waiting for 20 years for a moment like this, and she manufactured it at the perfect time, when the arrangement with the Shin girl was already in motion. She is not a victim, she is a strategist. Jaywan, to his credit, was quiet for a long time. "Mother," he said finally, "what if she's not? What if she's just a woman who loves my brother and finally stopped accepting less than she deserves?" Madame Yoon looked at him with eyes that had crossed 78 years of hardship and politics and still found a way to look disappointed. "You are too soft," she said. "Your father was too soft, too. Look where it got him." "He died at peace," Jaywan said. "I've never been sure that was nothing." The old woman stood and left the table without another word. The attacks came fast and from every direction. By noon, 3 Korean tabloids had published variations of the same story. Aging foreign mistress claims pregnancy at 60. Fertility experts weigh in on likelihood. The language was careful, just careful enough to avoid legal action, but the implication was clear. She is lying. She is manipulating him. She is desperate. By evening, an anonymous source had leaked to a gossip site that Adaeze had been meeting privately with Min-ho's competitors for the past year, a completely fabricated story that was nevertheless picked up by 2 business news outlets before Min-ho's legal team could file the first injunction. And then came the one that made Adaeze go cold. A message, delivered not through press or lawyers, but directly to her personal phone, a number that very few people had, from a contact she recognized as belonging to the Kang family's inner circle. The baby is not the problem. The problem is what we know about where your company's funding came from in 2009. We strongly recommend a quiet resolution. She stared at the message for a long time. Then she called Chisholm. "Mama." Her daughter's voice came through the Lagos connection, warm and immediate in the way only Chisholm's voice was. "I've been watching the news. Are you all right?" "I'm all right," Adaeze said. She was sitting in the bedroom of the Jeju villa, Min-ho asleep in the next room after a day of back-to-back crisis management, and she was allowing herself, for exactly the duration of this call, to not be all right. "The pregnancy is real," Chisholm said. It wasn't a question. "The pregnancy is real." A long exhale. "Mama, you're 60 years old." "I'm aware." "The risks." "I know the risks." Her voice was quiet. "I know all of them. I've read every paper, spoken to 3 specialists. I know what this means for my body. I know what could go wrong." She paused. "I also know that I have never in my life run away from something because it was hard." Silence on the line. "His family is going to destroy you," Chisholm said, not cruelly, practically, the way a daughter who had watched her mother navigate impossible rooms for 30 years spoke. "If they already have people digging up 2009, let them dig." Adaeze's voice hardened. "There is nothing in 2009 that I am ashamed of. They will make it sound like something it isn't. That's what people do when they can't find an actual weapon. She looked out at the dark water beyond the villa window. The question is what we do when they come. What do you want to do? Chisholm asked. Adaeze was quiet for a moment. I want to fight, she said. I'm tired of surviving quietly. I'm tired of making myself small enough to fit into spaces that were never meant for me. I'm 60 years old and I am carrying a miracle that nobody expected, least of all me, and I am tired. Her voice caught. I am so tired, Chisholm, of being treated like I don't belong in my own life. Her daughter was silent. And then, okay, Mama, then we fight. Here's the thing about Madame Yoon Soo Jin that everyone in Seoul knew, but no one ever said aloud. She was afraid, not of Adaeze specifically, not even of the pregnancy, though that complicated things significantly. She was afraid of what Adaeze represented, of what it meant that her son, her controlled, formidable, carefully managed son, had spent 22 years unable to let this woman go. She had watched them together. She had watched Min-ho's face when Adaeze entered a room, the way his entire body shifted, oriented, the way a compass needle orients to north, automatically, involuntarily, unable to do otherwise. She recognized that look. Her late husband, the original Kang patriarch, had looked at her that way once. Before the empire, before the pressure, before she had made the choice to crush that particular tenderness in herself, because the world they lived in had no mercy for tender people. She had survived by becoming hard, and she had spent 40 years making sure her children would too. What she had never fully planned for was the possibility that love, real, obstinate, 20-year love, might be harder than anything she had built. The family council convened on the third day. 22 people around the long table in the Kang family compound's boardroom. Uncles, cousins, senior board members, family lawyers. Min-ho sat at the head. Adaeze was not invited. She had not expected to be. What she had done instead, quietly while Min-ho navigated the room, was something none of them anticipated. She had called Kim Dong-hyun. Kim Dong-hyun was 71 years old, a semi-retired corporate lawyer who had spent 40 years knowing where every skeleton in the Kang family closet lived. He had worked for Min-ho's father. He had helped Min-ho bury his father's debts. He knew things about the 2009 funding source accusation that would make the people using it as a weapon understand immediately what a catastrophic mistake they were making. More importantly, he had loved Adaeze Okonkwo like a younger sister since the day Min-ho had brought him to meet her 12 years ago, and Dong-hyun had shaken her hand and then looked at Min-ho and said, "If you're not careful with this woman, I will personally be your enemy." He had meant it as a compliment. Min-ho had understood. Dong-hyun arrived at the family council meeting uninvited 20 minutes in, with a briefcase and an expression that made the room go quiet. He placed 3 folders on the table. "Before we continue," he said pleasantly, "I think there are some things we should clarify about what happens if this family chooses to pursue the 2009 line of attack against Ms. Okonkwo." He opened the first folder. Because the firm that was used to route the funding in question was also used in 2011 to move assets that the Korean tax authority would find very interesting. And that firm's records, he tapped the folder, show signatures from several people currently in this room. The silence was absolute. "I'm not here to threaten anyone," Dong-hyun continued. "I'm here to remind everyone that Ms. Okonkwo has been a part of this family for 22 years. She knows things. She has never used them. That restraint is a courtesy. It is not a weakness, and it would be very unwise to mistake one for the other." He closed the folder. "Now, can we discuss this situation like adults?" What no one in that room expected, what even Adaeze hadn't expected, was what happened next. Jaywan stood up. Min-ho's younger brother, the one who had always been quieter, smoother, less terrifying, the the one Madame Yoon had managed more successfully, or so she had always believed. He stood up and he looked at Minho, and he said something that cracked the room open from a completely different direction. I need to say something, and I need to say it before we spend one more hour in this room deciding this woman's fate without her present. Madame Yoon looked at her younger son sharply. Jaywan, 3 years ago, he said, I was going to leave the company. I had been offered a position in Singapore, nothing to do with Kang Industries, my own thing, a chance to build something that was actually mine. He looked down at his hands. I told Adaeze, not Minho, not mother, Adaeze, because she was the only person I trusted to give me an honest answer instead of a strategic one. The room was very still. She told me to go, he said. She said I would regret it every day if I stayed out of obligation instead of choice. She said that a life spent meeting other people's expectations is not a life. It's a sentence. He looked up, and then she said something I have thought about every day since. She said, Jaywan, your mother built her cage out of gold and forgot it was still a cage. Don't let her build yours. A soft, terrible sound from the end of the table. Madame Yoon. I didn't go to Singapore, Jaywan continued. I stayed, but I stayed because I chose to, because Adaeze helped me understand the difference. And that is the kind of person she is, not a strategist, not a manipulator. He looked at his mother. A woman who gives honest counsel even when it costs her something, even when staying in this family costs her everything. He sat down. The room was silent for a very long time, and then, quietly, from the head of the table, Minho said, Thank you, Jaywan. The pregnancy was not easy. No one pretended it would be. The specialists were honest with her. High risk, advanced maternal age, with complications that required monitoring that was more intensive than most. There would be difficult months. There would be moments when the body and the miracle fought each other for territory. But Adaeze had always done hard things. What she hadn't expected was Minho. She had expected the ring. He had put it on her finger 3 days after the gala. Quietly, in the villa kitchen, over morning coffee with no audience and no spectacle. Just the two of them, and the ring, and the understanding that this was real, now, in a way, it hadn't been before. She had expected the announcement, the carefully crafted press release from Kang Industries that acknowledged their relationship, their engagement, the pregnancy, in language that was measured and dignified and gave the tabloids almost nothing to work with. What she had not expected was his presence. Every appointment, every specialist consultation, every morning when the nausea came and she knelt over the bathroom sink at 5 a.m., he was there, not calling from another room, not sending a staff member, not managing the situation from a strategic distance. There, holding her hair back, bringing water, sitting on the bathroom floor in $6,000 pajamas without a single complaint. You don't have to do this, she told him once in the 4th month when she caught him reading. At midnight, with reading glasses he normally refused to be seen in, a pregnancy medical textbook he had apparently ordered the week of her announcement. He looked up at her over the glasses. I know I don't have to, he said. That's why I'm doing it. She looked at him. This man, this exhausting, complicated, finally brave man, and felt something shift in her chest, something that had been clenched for 20 years and was slowly, painfully learning to open. What are you reading? She asked. He held up the book. The chapter heading read, High-Risk Pregnancy After 55, What Partners Need to Know. She sat down next to him. He put the book down and pulled her close without saying anything, her back against his chest, his hands over hers, the Seoul skyline through the window, gray and glittering in the December darkness. I should have done this differently, he said quietly. 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, any time in the past 2 decades, I should have done this. You're doing it now, she said. Is it enough? She was quiet for a moment. Ask me again in 20 years, she said. He pressed his mouth to the top of her head. I intend to. It arrived without warning. Adaeze was 5 months pregnant, visibly, beautifully so, a fact that had sent the Korean tabloids through several conflicting cycles of mockery, then shock, then grudging fascination, when she received a call from Madame Yoon's personal assistant. Not a message, not a letter. A direct request for a private meeting. Minho advised against it. Chisholm, calling from Lagos, was blunter. Absolutely not, Mama. That woman has done nothing but wage war on you for 20 years. Whatever she wants to say, she can say it through lawyers. Adaeze went anyway. She met the old woman at a traditional tea house in Insadong, Madame Yoon's choice, which meant something. The old woman didn't make small choices. They sat across from each other with green tea between them, and for the first moment since they had first met, 20 years ago, neither of them was performing. Madame Yoon looked older, not merely old. She'd always been old in the way of powerful women, as if age had decided it was more afraid of her than the reverse. But today she looked tired in a way that went deeper than the body. I owe you an apology, the old woman said. Adaeze said nothing. She waited. I don't expect you to accept it, Madame Yoon continued. I'm not offering it to be forgiven. I'm offering it because I am 78 years old and I am not interested at this point in my life in dying as a coward. She looked down at her teacup. I treated you as a threat instead of a person. I used every tool available to me to diminish you, socially, politically, within this family. I made my son believe that love and legacy were mutually exclusive. The old woman's voice, for the first time in Adaeze's memory, was without its armor. I was wrong. The tea house was very quiet. I made that same choice once, Madame Yoon said softly, when Minho's father and I were young. There was a choice I could have made, to fight for what we were, what we could have been before the empire and the politics and everything that empire and politics required of us. I didn't fight. I chose the dynasty over the love. I told myself it was wisdom. Her eyes were dry, but only barely. I have spent 40 years calling it wisdom so that I wouldn't have to call it what it was. Adaeze looked at the old woman who had been her adversary for 2 decades, who had called her unworthy, orchestrated her exclusion, weaponized her love against her, and felt something she had not anticipated, grief. Not for herself, for this woman, for the choice she had made in her own youth that had hollowed her from the inside out and left her with an empire and a son who feared her more than he trusted her, and a life full of gold that had never quite made up for the warmth she had strangled in herself 50 years ago. Why are you telling me this? Adaeze said quietly. Because that child you're carrying deserves a grandmother who has at least attempted to be honest, Madame Yoon said, and because you deserved better than what I gave you. 20 years better. She looked up. I cannot give you those years back, but I can stop taking what's ahead. Silence. This is not a surrender, the old woman said, and something of the old iron crept back into her voice. Not malicious, just structural, the way some people are built. I still have opinions. I will still have them, but I will not, she paused, act against you again. Not you, not the child. Adaeze held the old woman's gaze for a long, careful moment. I don't need your blessing, Madame Yoon, she said gently, but I will raise this child to know their grandmother. Not the version you put on for the world, the version that showed up to this tea house today. She stood, collecting her coat. That woman, I think, is someone worth knowing. She left the old woman at the table. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The baby came at 3:47 in the morning on a Thursday in late March, as Seoul was still dark and cold, and the Han River looked like spilled ink from the hospital window. She came early. 6 days, nothing dangerous but enough to push the timeline into territory that required Adaeze to move from the villa into the hospital for the final week. Minho had not left the building in 4 days. His board had managed without him. The empire had run, as empires do, on its own momentum, because the truth about empires which powerful men spend their whole lives refusing to admit is that they mostly run themselves. The birth was hard, not catastrophic, not the disaster the worst-case medical scenarios had painted in Adaeze's more frightened moments, but long and painful, and at several points genuinely frightening in ways that she would not fully allow herself to feel until it was over. Minho held her hand through all of it. He held her hand with the same grip he'd had when the crystal shattered, only now there was no room full of witnesses, no performance, no history to overcome, just the two of them, and the dark morning and the doctors, and the sound of his voice in her ear speaking low Korean and Igbo phrases he had been secretly learning for months, his pronunciation imperfect and tender and absolutely genuine. At 3:47, the baby cried. A girl, perfect, whole, miraculous. Minho made a sound that Adaeze had never heard from him, something between a laugh and a sob that came from so deep inside him it seemed to come from a part of himself he had kept sealed since childhood. He was holding her before the nurse had finished the handoff. This tiny person, this impossible person, this evidence that life could still do impossible things. "What do we name her?" he whispered. Adaeze, exhausted and trembling and more completely happy than she had been since the night in Incheon, when he had stood in the rain and laughed. "Giada," she said. He looked at her. "G, for your world," she said softly. "Ada, for mine." He looked down at the baby. Giada. 2 worlds, 1 name, one small, certain, utterly real bridge between everything they were. "Giada," he said, testing it. The baby opened her eyes. They were dark and calm and seemed, in the way that newborns sometimes do, to be looking at something very far away that only they could see. "Hello," he whispered to her. "I've been waiting for you longer than you know." The announcement went out at 8 a.m. on a Tuesday. Not through a press release this time, not through lawyers or intermediaries or carefully managed corporate language. Minho posted it himself, on his personal account, the one he had used exclusively for Kang Industries business for 11 years and had never once used for anything personal. A photograph, taken in the hospital room with the morning light coming through the window, Adaeze in the bed holding Giada, looking more radiant than the tabloids had any framework to describe. Minho beside her, one hand on the baby, looking at Adaeze with an expression that, later, when the image went viral across every platform in Korea, Japan, China, Nigeria, and eventually the rest of the world, writers would spend thousands of words trying to capture, and ultimately couldn't, because it was simply love, without qualification, without architecture, without the careful management that powerful men put around things that scare them. Just love. The caption read, in Korean and English, "Adaeze and I welcomed our daughter, Giada Okonkwo, at 3:47 this morning. She is perfect. Her mother is extraordinary. I spent 20 years being too afraid to say clearly what I will spend the rest of my life saying as loudly as the world will let me. This woman is my home. She has always been my home. I was just too small for too long to deserve her. Giada, your mother will teach you how to stand in any room and own it. I will spend my life making sure no room is ever closed to you. Welcome, little bridge." The internet erupted. The tabloids that had spent 6 months running headlines about age gaps and scandal and manipulation and inappropriate pregnancies went very, very quiet. The Kang family board issued a statement of congratulations that was, word for word, what Min Ho had told them to write. Chisholm flew in from Lagos with 3 suitcases and cried for 40 minutes in the hospital room and then spent an hour making Adaeze eat properly and telling Min Ho exactly which tasks were now his permanent responsibility and which ones she would oversee remotely, with specificity that suggested she had been planning this list for some time. He agreed to all of it without negotiation. Madame Yoon arrived at the hospital on the second day. She stood in the doorway for a moment. This woman who had built a dynasty in a cage and spent decades confusing one for the other. And then she walked to the bed and looked at her granddaughter. Giada looked back at her. The old woman made a sound, soft, private, almost surprised, and reached out one finger. The baby's hand closed around it. No one in the room said anything. There was nothing to say. 3 years later. There is a photograph on the wall of the Kang Foundation's new offices in Lagos, the West African division, established in Adaeze's name, focused on textile industry development and women's entrepreneurship. It was Adaeze's condition. Not a condition for the marriage. She would have married him without it. But a condition she named for herself, because she had spent 22 years in Seoul, and it was time to build something in the soil she came from. The photograph shows a woman at a podium, speaking to a room of 600 people. She is 63 years old. She is wearing a gold-threaded Adaeze Okonkwo that she designed herself, because she is still, beneath all the titles and all the years, a seamstress's daughter who understands fabric. Her posture is absolute. Her eyes are clear. She looks like someone who has stood in every room the world tried to close to her and simply continued standing until the room surrendered. Beside the podium, slightly behind her, a man stands with his hands clasped, watching her speak with an expression that hasn't really changed since a hospital room in Seoul, or a ballroom floor with broken glass, or a rainy night in Incheon 25 years ago. On his hip, a small girl with dark, serious eyes and a barrette shaped like a star is watching her mother with the focused intensity of a child who is already instinctively learning how to be someone. Giada Okonkwo, 3 years old, a bridge between two worlds, two names, two histories that had no business becoming one story and became one anyway. Through love and stubbornness and a pregnancy at 60 that nobody, least of all her mother, had expected. Nobody was mocking Adaeze Okonkwo anymore, not because the world had become kind. The world, as a rule, does not become kind, but because there are some women who stand so completely in their own truth that the world, eventually, reluctantly, inevitably, runs out of language for anything other than respect. She finished her speech. The room rose, and Kang Min-ho, the most feared billionaire in Korean history, watched the woman he had loved across 2 decades and 2 continents receive a standing ovation in the city she was born in, and felt for perhaps the first time in his 63 years on this earth that he understood the meaning of the word earned. Not the empire, not the money, not the title. This room, this woman, this impossible, magnificent, completely unexpected life. He shifted his daughter on his hip. She was pointing at her mother with a 3-year-old's uncomplicated certainty, the way children point at things that matter to them, with her whole hand and her whole heart. "That's Mama," she announced to no one in particular. "Yes," Min-ho agreed. He looked at Adaeze. She was looking back at him now, across the room, the way she always had, with eyes that had seen him clearly from the very beginning, in every light, at every angle, in all his courage and all his fear. She smiled. He smiled back. "That's Mama. That's everything."